I would like to share that if someone is triggered by today's episode, because it can be a sensitive topic, if they have experienced trafficking, if they're a survivor of human trafficking, or currently a victim, that it's okay to step away. And if you need to pause or if you need someone to talk to, you can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline.
Welcome to the TyneeTalks podcast, the podcast that educates and entertains, the podcast where you come to laugh and learn. I am your host, Tynee, and today I have a very important topic to discuss: human trafficking, protect the children. This is so important that you know the signs to detect human trafficking and how you can help someone. Today's guest to help us understand human trafficking is licensed clinical social worker Doniece Douglas, who has seen victims of human trafficking and can give us tips on how to recognize the signs. Doniece, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure, Doniece. You know you're my girl. We go way
back.
It's crazy to say because we were just talking about it's been 10 years, maybe 15 years. No, it's been almost 20 years. That's crazy because we're still 25.
Yep.
But Doniece, I'm so glad that you agreed to be a guest on the show today to talk about human trafficking because it is so prevalent, especially here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and a lot of metropolitan cities because it's so fast-paced in bigger cities rather than in a smaller city where people kind of know each other. It's kind of easier to get away with such a thing. So to our audience who may just be unfamiliar with what trafficking is, maybe they've seen it on a reel, maybe they've seen it on a TikTok, but they don't necessarily know what it is. Can you define what human trafficking is?
Yes, it's basically manipulation, control, forcing someone against their will to do certain things, whether it's sexual acts or it's labor trafficking, and the person that's doing the controlling, like the trafficker, they're the ones that gain profit from exploiting someone else and using it and taking their vulnerability for taking advantage of their vulnerability.
Wow, that's scary. What would you say a profile of a trafficker is?
It's really hard to describe because they're everyday people. I know, there's a lot of things going around in regards to talking about trafficking and elites that are doing certain things, which that's a part of it as well. But we don't look in our own backyards. There are several children that that can be trafficked by family members. Someone that they know. A lot of times they make it as if it's a white van that pulls up and snatches a child off the street, when most of the time it's someone that they know. So it's really that's why they get away with it, because it's kind of hard to identify someone as a profile and looking at someone. Usually, like I said, as far as manipulators or usually when they're doing their grooming, trying to build trust with someone, and then later using it against them to exploit them.
Again, scary. So it could be your cousin, your uncle, your aunt, the neighbor down the street, because they do have built that trust with you. So if you're used to getting in the car with them, maybe they went to your mom and was like, I can help you out. I can pick them up from school every now and then. And so they start doing it to the point where then it's like, your mom told me to pick you up. And they're like, well, she didn't tell me. Oh, she called me. And then now you in Florida. That is scary business. So what are the biggest myths or misconceptions people have about human trafficking? I know you mentioned the white van, but are there any other misconceptions?
Sometimes even children are trafficked, adults are trafficked as well, and sometimes even with adults, they're like, oh, they could just leave. But if people kind of think of it as even with domestic violence situations, it's not that easy because they've done so much. They've done things mind control, abuse. Right? So a lot of it is psychological. They don't necessarily need chains or a locked door or something like that, because it's the mind control aspect of being able to manipulate someone to get them to do certain things, and then threatening, like if you tell, I'll, disrupt your whole family or something like that. So they make those types of threats, and people really believe it, because
why wouldn't you?
Right.
Yeah, because you kidnapped me, and now I'm afraid you're doing all these things to me. Why wouldn't you kill my loved one?
Absolutely.
So that makes sense. It's kind of like there's a TV show, I think it's called Missing, where the girl was missing for years, and to your point, to the point where he didn't have to tie her up. She was so scared that she didn't break free for years. Yep. So that's scary. Also, to that point, when you say that it's like being in an abusive relationship and it's hard to leave, are some of the traffic victims, especially the adult ones, fed drugs too?
They are. A lot of times they may even have grown up in abusive types of situations where they may have been abused by their parents, or then they've gotten into abusive relationships, and then now they're being trafficked by someone. They usually do pump them full of drugs to make it easier, for them to participate in certain things that they may not do if they're coherent, or they may be trying to screaming or trying to get away or something like that, and they don't want to cause that type of uproar, to get what they want.
To sedate them, essentially. Okay, I get that. Who you kind of answered this question, that who's the most vulnerable to be trafficked and why? And you said usually they maybe have a history of abuse.
Some people may have a history of abuse. The homeless population, children in foster care, people that are undocumented. It's certain things that the vulnerability doesn't necessarily mean weakness. It comes in like unmet needs. So shelter or food, or even if you have your needs met, but you're materialistic, or you wish you had this or that, and someone comes in and they're like, well, I can get you that,
and you're like,
it
oh,
kind of
really?
building, yes. So it kind of goes to that effect as well. And then especially foster care, because they
already feel unwanted.
They feel unwanted. No one loves them. And then the trafficker uses that like nobody's going to look for you, so they're able to still take advantage in that way.
You use a very key term. You said the most vulnerable are people who have unmet needs. So it's basically like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs: basic food, shelter, the bare minimum.
Yes.
So when you mention homeless people, if they are unhoused and they've been without food for days, or they're out in the cold and you happen to catch them, like we just experienced Alaska, then it's easy to dangle that carrot in front of them and say, come follow me to this place. And wow, and they are vulnerable because they're bamboozled in a sense, and they have this unmet need, and I need. So it's like, and then like you said, the undocumented, they could be threatening to call the people, and so you thinking that they're thinking possibly that this is a better scenario than I've been in, so I'm going to take this, and then it just spirals into chaos. So when that happens, right, and the unmet needs happen, the person gets trafficked, what does that look like on the other side for when a person does get rescued? When the lie is the torn down, someone was searching for me, someone was looking for me, I get rescued. What does the other side of that look like?
From there, it's really the safety first. And then you also you don't want to force them to explain what happened, because you don't want to continue to like re-traumatize them. Let them know that you believe them and that you're there to provide the support that they need. And it's really also letting them have the choice of what they want to do next, because they just came from a situation where they were being told what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. So you want to be able to, they are the center and the decision maker of their life. And so you just want to support them in what they choose to do next, but you want to make sure that they're safe.
Is it, do sometimes the victims experience Stockholm syndrome, where they are missing the abuser and they want to return to that?
There have been victims that have been rescued, and then, which is why a lot of times the safe haven type places don't want to disclose like the areas that they're in, but there have been times where victims, they end up calling, or calling the person that held them against their will initially, and wanting to go back, because it's that mind control. It's so deep, with certain things that they may have told them, and they tend to want to go back sometimes.
That makes sense. A few years ago, I volunteered with an organization that helped traffic victims, and they do have multiple residences throughout the DFW for that reason, so that if let's say they rescue the person from the north, they might send them to the west.
Yeah.
And then it's very adamant that you do not disclose where you are, so that you can't be found. That's extremely important. It also made me think about, sometimes in the entertainment world, they'll try to help you digest a terrible topic in a funny way. And so I think about Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, who was essentially trafficked in a bunker, and that came from a true story that happened in Cleveland. But things like that where they're held, and then sometimes, can you also expound on the fact that a trafficked person might not be the only one? They might be in a community of trafficked people. And how does that play on their psyche too? Do they have, maybe they were rescued, but the people, like maybe they went to a gas station, but they know that there are 10 other victims back at where they came from. Is there a little bit of survivor's remorse?
Yes. There are definitely community trafficking rings, and they do feel guilty sometimes, like I left them behind, or we made a pact, if one of us get out, like we're gonna come back and or tell someone, and once they get out, they realize that it's not that easy. Of course, they can inform law enforcement, or certain task force are able to kind of try to maneuver or figure out how they're going to do their sting or whatever it is they need to do, but they can feel guilty sometimes because they were the ones that got away and left the other people behind.
So in the event of the most vulnerable that you spoke of, right, undocumented, unhoused, foster care, as opposed to someone who was actually taken from a family, how, I know you said you asked them, how do they want to be serviced, but how do they integrate back into society if they don't necessarily have somewhere to go to, like a person who came from a home?
So usually, and it's up to them, and of course it depends on their age. If it's a child, it's you definitely are immediately reporting law enforcement, where their child protective services needs to get involved. If it's an adult, the best thing is, really, there are different centers or different places that help with people that have experienced that type of trauma. So if it is like they're not going back home to their family because, well, they were the ones that got them into that life, there are other services or other avenues that they could take, as far as getting resources, funding, or things like that, to be able to get housed somewhere else and get medical care, get counseling. So there are certain agencies that have
those resources for them to integrate them back. Thank you for that. How does trafficking show up in everyday places, people that they wouldn't expect?
And it really is everywhere. Hotels, massage parlors, nail salons, at the airport,
So someone could be posing as like a Uber or Lyft driver. Now,
yes,
that's the most scariest.
That is, yes, yeah.
Everybody, turn on your locations when you're at the airport, right? So that at least your family could say, this is the last place she was.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that. So you need to be picked. Okay, this is very important. To the people out there that be like, I don't want to pick you up from the airport. You could be saving your family member's life if you go pick them up from the airport. Wow, that's scary.
And a lot of people do. My friends talk about me because I don't ride in Uber by myself. Okay. If I need to go somewhere, and then I do try to get rides to the airport and things like that. I've only really done that type of thing in a group. Yeah. I've never done it by myself, really. But yeah, that
makes sense. I mean, you don't think about it, right? Because Uber and Lyft it's become a societal norm. So you're not thinking about it. But especially if you're a single woman, you're a woman, or maybe a man that doesn't look as intimidating to someone that may, you know, they could drive you off somewhere and you wouldn't even. That is scary. Like, you're blowing me. You're blowing my mind right now. Like, that is crazy. What are some warning signs that somebody might be a traffic victim? So let's just say I'm out in public, I'm in Walmart, and something, I don't know, something seems off, but how could I recognize that someone is being trafficked?
That's the biggest thing, is discernment. I don't think people use it enough. If you do feel like something is off, it is telling you, you know, maybe to be a little more alert. It may look like them looking nervous or anxious, them holding their head down. The trafficker may be with them. If a sales associate is asking questions to the victim, you know, the trafficker may be answering for them. You know, and even in medical settings, it was like 87 to 88% of victims reported that they came in contact with a medical professional while they were being trafficked, and it wasn't picked up on that they were a victim. Right. You know, so it's really kind of paying close attention, and I really think that God gave us discernment to use it for a reason. You know, so it does kind of tug at our spirit a little bit to kind of just watch and
like that feels
like
odd.
Something seems off, and then you can pay more attention, and then you look, you know, can kind of see, well, you know, it's been people that have been in different places where they have called law enforcement, and they got their camera on, you know, because they're saying, this guy has been inappropriately touching this girl, and you know, just something didn't feel right in my spirit, and they've called, you know, law enforcement to come get involved because I knew something was off, you know. So
and it happened to be, but it was a discernment. When you feel that little tinge, follow it.
Absolutely.
So what if a person does lean into the discernment, but they're like, I don't want to be harmed? What are some tips for them?
It would still be contact. No, yeah, you definitely don't want to try to get involved because
them.
You don't want to do not approach.
Okay.
You don't want to do that. You definitely want to call 911, you know, and inform them of what it is that you see, what may be going on. Give a description of the clothing. If you're outside and you know you're able to see the license plate, do not approach.
Photo.
Do not
Like
make
that.
sure. Yep.
Oh wow. These are this is blowing my mind because I'm pretty sure, like you said, we've all been in contact with a traffic victim, but we were in our own worlds, maybe even in our phones. And that's another thing, not to be in your phone, you know, like this, if you're walking to your car, especially at night or even during the day, because you could be making yourself vulnerable to being harmed in that way. So what does your role look like when you're working with trafficking survivors as a social worker?
Believing them, definitely having patience, because a lot of times people can label a victim as being difficult because they don't want to come forward with exactly what was done to them, but showing up consistently for them, letting them know that you're there for support, you know, and then connecting them with those things that they need once they've come out of that situation. So really, you know, also being aware of them, they just came out of a crisis, and being able to, you know, provide that support to them as well.
So the patience part that you speak of, because it's kind of like trying to pull it out of them, like what happened, is that steeped in shame? They feel so shamed that they allowed they didn't allow, they were forced. They were forced, but you know.
That's the thing too, because it's kind of like, you know, if someone steps on your toe and you're like, oh my God, that hurt, and they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to step on your toe, but your toe doesn't stop hurting because they stepped on it and they apologize for it. So it's kind of like the same thing. Like, just because they come out of the situation, it doesn't mean that they're out of it immediately, because mentally they're still trapped into the situation that they just came out of. Another thing that I usually speak on is the mental health part of it. A lot of people don't talk about that side. There's a difference in someone that may have been trafficked for like 7 days versus someone that's been trafficked for 7 years. Not to downplay the 7 days, but a lot of times they develop complex post-traumatic stress disorder. It's been continuous, going on for years and years. And a lot of times they develop dissociative identity disorder, and I don't think a lot of people speak to that. it used to be called multiple personality disorder. So when you are experiencing trauma, you disassociate, especially a child, because your brain can't handle the extent of the trauma that you're going through. So your mind goes somewhere else. Your mind splits, or it creates an alter, because you're trying to escape the pain and the trauma that you're going through. So let's say you've done that over and over for 7 years. You've been in that type of situation. You develop those individual personalities during that time. So even in regular life, if we come in contact with people that you see a 20-year-old person, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, why are they acting so childish? Like, you know, well, the 5-year-old them that was abused and traumatized, you know, is coming out. And a lot of people don't really speak to that. I don't think even in my field, I really, you know, a lot of times they're misdiagnosed bipolar schizophrenia, but dissociative identity disorder is a huge diagnosis that a lot of victims have if they've experienced that trauma over and over and over again for years. It's a $150 billion industry. Trafficking is. It makes more money than the drug industry, because with drugs you have to keep making it. You know, with a person, if you take them at 5 years old and then have them for 7 years, you've used them multiple times a day, days a week, over and over and over, you know, unfortunately. And I just don't think people realize that aspect of it.
I honestly can say I didn't realize it. Like I feel teary-eyed. I'm not going to cry. But when you put it in that context, that is sad, it's scary, it's almost unbelievable, but it's happening. And when you talk about the trauma piece and them building these new identities, and they might have to be a new person with every John that they might have to service, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Or if they're a male victim and they're being trafficked and forced to do acts that's not maybe natural to them, or even a young person who they're not even at the maturation stage physically or mentally to be doing some of the adult things. So wow. And what's the new name for multiple personalities?
Dissociative identity disorder.
So why the name change?
You know what? I don't know. They just changed it in the diagnostic and statistical manual.
Yeah, the DSM. I know a little bit.
Okay.
I know a little bit. Multiple personalities is just easier to. Why y'all do it too much? Like multiple personalities, that's easier to digest. But wow, I understand why they're saying you're dissociating yourself to create, like you said, these alternate worlds. Wow. So you said there's a difference between the 7 and the 7 years, but how does trust come back to these victims, no matter the length? How do you build that?
It goes back to definitely, like I said, believing them, because a lot of times victims, even if they're like watching the TV and things that are going on now and seeing people have these conversations about who did this, or are they on this list, or, you know, and it's like the victim is getting lost because people are trying to figure out, well, they're trafficking children, well, they're trafficking children over here. Well, what about the children? Like, what are we going to do to help them? So believing them, because if they're looking at things that are going on now, it's like, well, no wonder nobody's going to come save me, or no wonder nobody believes me. So it's really believing them and letting them be able to tell their story in a way, you know, that they're able to tell it at the time that they're able to tell it, and that consistency and showing up for them over and over again, because depending on how long they may have been held against their will, they may think you're just like, you're going to do the same thing, you know, that someone else did to them. But showing up consistently, providing that support consistently, you know, it's really consistency is the thing, you know, that they would need to see because of the experiences that they had.
So you mentioned earlier that there's a large group of trafficked individuals who have said, yeah, my abuser did take me to healthcare. I may have sustained whatever type of injury or STD or STI, and they did take me to get treatment. And the healthcare person didn't help me. Can you give people tips in that setting, like in a healthcare setting or in a shelter? How can they, because you gave us tips on if you're in a grocery store of how they can maybe recognize a victim. how can a person in a hospital setting recognize a victim?
It could be unexplained injuries, maybe some old injuries too that, they may be there for something and then you realize they have some older injuries that may have not been treated. The conversation that you have with them, a lot of times they may not want to talk, especially if the trafficker is there with them. They're going to be speaking for them. You want to, as best as you can, try to, I don't want to say isolate, but kind of be able to talk to them without the other person present, and to try to get more information.
So to that point, and again, art imitates life. I watch a lot of TV. And so I was watching an episode of The Resident, and you just sparked a memory that there was an episode of Trafficking where they were trying to get the victim from the trafficker. Like in that scenario, the healthcare workers was like, something's not right because he was speaking. And so they requested an MRI or an X-ray where they said, well, we got to take this person. You can't come. Yeah. So would you say?
That would be, yes, definitely. And a lot of places have SANE nurses, sexual assault nurse examiners, I believe that's what that stands for, where you can even get them involved. Like if you're providing bedside care as a nurse, or if you are a physician, providing care to the patient. Most hospital settings have that type of support where they can actually, call them they kind of know how to kind of maneuver in. And
they have the verbiage.
And like you said, they can say, well, we need to take them off, to do
without
some more
triggering.
Testing. Absolutely.
Yeah, to say, well, you can't go through the CAT scan with her.
Right.
So, hey, let's get you away.
Yes.
Wow. So with you saying, law enforcement, healthcare, different things like that, what tips would you give a common person, an everyday person, to collaborate with law enforcement, healthcare to reduce trafficking in their own communities?
It's definitely a community action type of thing because, it is happening everywhere. But I would say education. Really, it starts with education, learning more about the signs and what they could look for, who to contact in the neighborhood. Even like I said, I go back to law enforcement, because it's an immediate thing if somebody's in immediate danger. But it's really educating ourselves on, what to look for and what's happening. Yeah.
So we kind of spoke earlier about most victims are victimized by people they know. So what would you say to parents? Should they have codes in place? Should they say, well, although you've ridden with neighbor down the street a few times, if you don't hear it from me, I don't care what they say. If I didn't get a text, if you didn't get a note from school saying this, don't get in the car no matter what. Should there be like a safety plan, just like we might have a fire plan if the house catches on fire?
Definitely.
What would you say to that?
Yes. Safety plan, definitely. Also, just having those discussions with them, especially small children, no one's supposed to be touching you here or doing that, having those types of conversations. If someone tells you not to tell, there are so many things going on, I want you to feel comfortable letting me know. I understand that they may say they may harm me or something like that, but it is okay to tell me because I'm your parent, and like you said, having those safety plans in place, like, if you didn't hear it from me to say I'm going to come pick you up, or if you even want to call me on the spot, to ask me, what's going on. So
that's good, because you can say, well, let me call my mom first. And if they're like, no, red flag, I'm calling my mama. Or even saying to your kids, if you don't feel comfortable saying and we tell your big cousin, or tell your auntie, or, to tell your big brother, somebody that, even your best friend. And, like I said, I think it all goes back to community. I think I grew up in a time, you and I grew up in a time where there was community, where you did, everybody on the street knew each other in the neighboring streets. So I would say getting to know our neighbors, because, again, you don't know what your neighbors got going on. And also, I'm guilty of this. Once I Investigate your neighbors because they could be on a list. Investigate your neighbors, do it subtly, get to know the people around you and things of that nature. So, you went into social work. I think social work takes a special kind of heart. What would you say to a person out there that's wanting to become a social worker, in the process of becoming a social worker? What tips would you give them going into the field and knowing that they will encounter these type of scenarios?
I will say social work chose me. Okay. But it is, I've always been the helpful person. Even when I was younger, people would tell me things that they may not tell someone else, and I never understood, like, well, why are you telling me? But they knew that they could confide in me. So in going through schooling, as far as getting an education in social work, they really teach you, of course, the textbook things, but the experience is really where you're going to get more of how you respond to certain situations in different environments, whether you're in a hospital setting or you're a school social worker. It's really shadowing different people, and then in the programs they have those internships where you can gain that type of exposure, but really experience stepping out there, along with the education is how because you don't always encounter the same, it's not really a cookie cutter thing. So it's like you're going to have those thought processes of how to help somebody that may be in a situation, depending on where you're starting from in the situation, and how to go about it and helping, them get past it.
Thank you for that. And to close out today's episode, do you have any resources for our viewers out there and our listeners that they can maybe contact if they suspect human trafficking?
The National Human Trafficking Hotline is a big place. They're a big place to start. They're open 24/7, and then they also have bilingual staff. I began Justice Unchained, my organization, to do exactly really what I'm doing now, as far as educating people, educating the community on being aware, what signs to look for, and if someone is in an immediate danger, you need to notify law enforcement. So you definitely would call 911 if someone's in an immediate danger.
Doniece, I want to thank you so much for being a guest on the Tynee Talks podcast. Can you let our viewers and listeners know where they can follow your organization to gain more insight and information on this very important topic of trafficking?
Yes, thank you for having me and extending the invitation. They can find me on justiceunchained.org. That's my website, and all of my social media platforms are listed on my site.
Thank you, Doniece. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Tynee Talks podcast on human trafficking, protect the children, and anybody that has been a victim of human trafficking. I want to thank my guest, Doniece, for coming on and sharing her expertise on this subject. And make sure that you tune into all of the Tynee Talks podcasts, because these are the podcasts that educate but also entertain. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Tynee Talks podcast. And remember, Tynee talks and you listen. It's Tynee Talks right here. We gonna talk about it right here. I'm gonna talk about everything you like. I'm gonna make it real quick, cause it's Tynee Talks. And I'm gonna talk about it. Yeah, cause it's Tynee Talks. And I'm gonna talk about it.